Start streaming. That says live. I think we're live now.
Let's see what we got.
Actually, I believe that's the stream. Whoops, no, keep going. Keep going. Public, stream settings. Do you see anything live?
I do not.
My channel. It shows live right there. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we're definitely live, I think. Live. Here we go. We should be good right now. My channel. There may be some weirdness. 2 people watching. All right. I'll do the social.
There we go. See it now. Down, so I get chat up. Hello, Charles. How are you?
All right, there's that. Here is this. And retweet. Get it on Reddit. Wow, lots of action on Reddit. People, we gotta rate my team thread, people. Come on. Well, that's fine. That's fine. Link. I'm not gonna go crazy. 35, I put it in the wrong spot again. Live broadcast, live stream. There we go. Copy and paste and submit. All right. Well, there you go. Might give me a holler, and I'll let you guys have to it. Thanks for joining us, Todd. I really appreciate it, and congrats on doing so well again this year.
Yeah, sure.
All right. I'll see you
Thanks,
later.
Todd. All right. Todd, is your name pronounced Modisette or Modisette, or how? Because I don't want to add your name to a list of names that I inevitably butcher.
It's Modisette.
Modisette. Okay, that's how I would have done it.
Yep.
Good. How's everyone doing tonight? Oh, Ryan Anderson is coming. Here we go. We got Ryan. Hello, Ryan. Can you hear us? I cannot hear Ryan. Come to us, Ryan. Ryan is connecting to audio. Now that would explain it. The child is staring into your soul, Patrick, as he is wont to do, making you examine all of your life choices, making you reconsider them. Hey Ryan, how are you?
Hey there. I'm good. I'm in a car right now, but I'll be home in a little bit, and then I'll have access to my computer and all that. So
Gotcha.
I won't be able to give much of the MLS fantasy stats in this until then, but I'll at least be able to, I don't know, contribute to the humor or something until then.
Gotcha. Sounds good. All right. Well, do you want us to go ahead and get started now?
Sure.
And by the way, guys, if you're wondering like what's going on in the background, that's my son Benedict. He's watching the Saints game. Say hi, Benedict.
Hi.
Hi, Benedict.
So if you hear like a random shout in the middle of the podcast, it's because the Saints actually did something good for a change, which would be nice for any of my teams to do something good.
I've got the Chargers in a couple of my fantasy teams, so
I don't need to hear that. I don't need to hear that, Ryan. Well, I mean, to be honest, if you have Herbert, you're doing pretty well because he's thrown for 3 touchdowns already. So.
No, I've got the 2 guys that he threw touchdowns to too. So.
Well, who is it? Was it Allen who got hurt? Someone got hurt. Anyway, we'll get back to the football instead of the football. All right. All right. Hello, fantasy managers, and welcome to the MLS Fantasy Insider. Tonight, we're going to preview the somewhat massive double game week, round 11 of the 2020 fantasy season. This episode is brought to you by schedule changes, because MLS Fantasy was way too easy as it was. No. I mean, brought to you by MLSFantasyBoss.com and the amazing MLSFI Patreon supporters. I'm your host, Michael Denton. Reed and Blaine can't be with us today. The MLSFI community has a mixture of joy and grief. As y'all know, Reed and his wife were expecting a baby. They had a very healthy baby boy, Landon, last week. So Reed is taking care of new little baby MLS Fantasy Boss or MLS Fantasy Baby. We haven't quite decided on the name yet, but mom and baby are doing very well, very healthy. So we're very happy about that. On the other hand, unfortunately, Blaine had a death in his family, so he's taking care of that. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Blaine and his family. So that's why he can't be with us tonight. And so why I'm doing it by myself of the normal co-host. But it's such a big double game week. It's the first week of the Champions League. We definitely want to make sure we got fantasy advice to you. So we've invited 2 guests with me tonight. We have Todd Modaset and Ryan Anderson of MLS Fantasy Stats. How are y'all doing tonight, guys?
All right, doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great as well. And for those that are wondering, who weren't on the podcast beforehand and are wondering why my screen looks very creepy, it's because I'm in a car and I'm attempting to do this by phone light at the moment.
Yeah, Ryan's trying to join us by car, so there might be some audio issues with his feed, but we'll try to make sure it's as good as possible for you guys. So
I'll mute as much as possible.
All right, so round 10 is in the books. It was a double game week for all teams going in, and a lot of teams lost a double game week due to COVID. So curveball, a lot of fantasy managers got busted up by losing out on that second game for a lot of teams. How did you guys do? I guess we'll start with Todd.
Well, good timing to have me on. I had my best week of the season. It was week ranked 11 overall with 114 points. Hit my captain with Lodero, got 26 there. And Castianos from New York City and Tinnerholm both had double-digit games. So it was a good double game week for me overall. I think this one was a lot about if you just avoided some of the people who blanked, because it seemed like there was a lot of players who had at least got a goal, assist, clean sheet, but some of the ones like Casper from Philadelphia didn't do so well.
Yep. How about you, Ryan?
Well, that sounds very familiar. I also had, I think, the best week that I've had this year. And so I ended up, I think, with 109 overall. This is going by memory at the moment, but I also captained Lodero, and I also had Casper Servilko, and so I had the blessings and curses, one might say, that Todd did as well. And then I had a pretty solid switcheroo going with the Nashville defense, a couple Nashville defense. And then who else did I hit on? I also had Castianos on the bench coming in. And then I had Lee Win, his second game. He got 13 points. So those are kind of my big winners for the week.
Well, I'm glad y'all had great weeks because I did not. I only got 80 points. It wasn't really because of the second game. I mean, I had a few Orlando players like Smith and DK on the bench who I was kind of hoping, might do something, but they didn't get the chance in the second game. But I mean, all was just kind of like mediocre overall. Nothing really hit for me. I had Pozuelo as my captain, and he didn't do as well as Ladero did. I'm trying to go through my team, but for some reason, MLS Fantasy just will not load my past team, which shows how bad it really was. So I'm looking at the scores over in chat. We definitely had some good scores: 87, 88, 86, 91. So that looks like about the range. You really kind of wanted to score in the 90s. If you got a score like 80, you probably, like me, you went down. If you got into triple digits this week, you did pretty well. So let's kind of get to, I mean, it was a crazy week with the COVID situation. We kind of expected the Rapids to get the first game postponed, maybe not necessarily the weekend. And then we had the Columbus Crew match get postponed. The Minnesota match get postponed. So it was a very kind of crazy weekend. What kind of takeaways did y'all get from this weekend?
Well, for fantasy, my biggest takeaway, which will probably be even more of a rule of this game week, is for the double game weeks with possible postponements or suspensions for COVID, the first game is really the most important. I think most of the players I picked, they had their biggest game on the first game of the week. And those are the ones where you could see the lineup, know that the game is happening. So I think that was a big lesson from this week, and it's going to be a big lesson for this coming week.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with that. That's one of the things that I noticed too. If I don't know that a player is going to be playing, I do not start them. Like in fact, I don't even know if I put them on the bench. I think I had to confirm that. Who was it for Houston? My gosh, Manotas. I put Manotas on the bench, and of course he got his red card. But I was concerned that Manotas wouldn't be starting. I wasn't sure if Manotas would or if Ramirez would be. So I had to make sure, though, that he was starting so that I could get that second game. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way that I got the second game. But but basically, at this point, if I don't see them, I'm not going to count on a second game appearance, even if they're on the bench in the first game. I don't count on any minutes being played. And I pretty much only go for guaranteed people who are going to get guaranteed minutes in that first game. So you don't know if you're going to get a second one.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, when y'all are making your picks, should we be only looking at the first game and just looking at the second game as kind of a bonus chance? I mean, is there any value in saying, well, this team, I don't like the first matchup as much, but the second matchup is better? Or are those kind of players only going to be bench options, or do they even make your bench?
Well, if they're actually playing for the first game of the week and they have a intriguing second matchup, I don't think you should rule those players out. I mean, there'll still be most of the games probably played for the second game. It just adds more uncertainty. So my priority will go to the first game of the week. And if there's a really good player who has a really intriguing matchup for the second game, I definitely would still consider them. But if it's like a sort of a long shot, risky type player who you like for their second game, that's really adding a lot of risk when you don't know if they might not even start or play that game. So it depends on the player. So for the strong players, I don't mind looking at the second matchup as much. But the general guide, I think just the first one is the main one you look at, and the second one is sort of a bonus.
Yeah, for me, I tend to look at both matchups, but my way of determining whether or not I'm going to keep that player is whether or not they're in that first lineup, and whether or not there's been any news on the COVID front now. Like that's something that is playing such a major factor in, avoid this team because they've had, one player that's tested positive, and that's kind of just the way that I've been looking at it now. That was one of the reasons why I avoided Minnesota, is because I had heard some news that a player tested positive at some point, and so I just avoided Minnesota, and it turned out that was a good decision.
All right. Well, what about some on the fields? Were there any players who kind of stood out to you as this might be a player to jump on the bandwagon, or any players to kind of hop off the bandwagon? Any kind of big names jump out to you? I know for me, which I mean, it's surprising as an NYCFC fan, Tati Castianos, 4 million midfielder did, 4 million forward. He did really well. With Abear out, he's going to get a lot more playing time than he has recently. He's definitely going to be one on the radar. And there's another 4 million forward that we might talk about. What about y'all? Anyone stand out to you?
Yeah, I'd say Taddy is one that I was going to mention as well, because he even took a penalty kick the previous game, I think, the previous week. So I don't know if he was supposed to, or if he was like planned to be the guy that would take that, but yeah, he was one guy. And then Lee Win has taken on the Carles Gil role of the main playmaker for New England now, taking a lot of that ability also from that production away from Boo as well. So now Lee Win is the creator, the bonus points getter of New England. And so if you're going to take a New England player, you got to go Lee Win, I think, at this point. And he's only, I do not have this in front of me, but he was in the, I think, like 6 million range last week. He's probably gone up quite a bit, but
he's
still
7.3.
cheap for where his, he's still cheap for what his production probably is going to be. If he's playing a double game week, which I think he is, but I'm not sure.
He is not as of right now the way that they have the schedule. We'll talk about that at home, KB, because it's weird.
Right now.
It's weird. Todd, anybody from you?
Yeah, a couple guys. So for Columbus, Pedro Santos, he actually scored double-digit points without getting a goal or assist, which is extremely rare. With Valeri out, he's just taking over all the set pieces, and I think that makes him a really intriguing option, even though Columbus is scuffling a little bit. And then also, one that's big for this week because of his matchups, Pavone had been not playing well for the Galaxy. He had been a big fantasy factor earlier in the year, and then had been scuffling, and then he put up a 15 this week. So I think that definitely brings him way back into the radar for fantasy picks going forward.
Yeah. What other? Oh, sorry, Ryan. You go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I one of the things I've been noticing recently is a lot of people think that Joao Paulo has had like people have taken him at a similar clip as Lodero, but both in total fantasy points and in underlying stats, I've seen Lodero have a much larger role in the team than Joao Paulo is, at least from a ability to produce fantasy points perspective. I mean, Lodero's on penalties, so that, okay, fine, that's an extra little added bonus. But overall, other expected assists and expected goals, Joao Paulo is not anywhere close to what Lodero is from that perspective. And so I don't think that someone can justify taking Joao Paulo if you have the money for Lodero at this point. Like, they're not comparable in my mind at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, money's the big thing with Lodero because his prices have skyrocketed. But let me ask all this. I know there was some talk on Discord that this was the week that maybe 125 million was starting to really hurt. How have y'all felt about the price changes as we go into the last section of the Champions League?
Well, I like it right now. Like early in the season, we basically everybody could pick almost every player they wanted. Usually it would just be like 1 or 2 slots where you had to go cheap. Now you have to balance it a little more. But I mean, I think especially since we all have the same budget, I think last week was a good lesson on that Lodero as a captain really paid off. I know some people switched to Paulo or other players who are a bit cheaper, but I think one of the big lessons is as the budget gets tighter is really make room for your star players, especially your captain pick. You should save your budget in other places because the captain is so important that you shouldn't bypass the captain just because they're expensive. And even like your top 4 to 5 players, I would really try to make room for them and then go budget around there. And if you need to fill all your roster with cheaper players, do that. But find your key guys and don't bypass them just because they're expensive.
Yeah, and one thing I'd mention is those cheap the cheap players are changing every week now. So before, with the old pricing systems from a couple of years ago, you'd have a player that wouldn't move much. Like, they suddenly became a starter, but they would never actually get to the price point of being a starter, and so you could always count on them to slot in as your cheap guy that you either throw onto the bench or, even if he became a starter in that way, then you wanted to put him out in the field, you do that. But this year, the cheap players that you're going to get are constantly changing because, suddenly with you choose a cheap player because you know that they're going to get good points, or you expect that they will, and then they get good points, and then they rise by $1,000 for the next week. So you're starting to have to look more closely for those cheap players, or even like I've at some points never considered certain players because I never looked at their price, and then I suddenly realized, oh, this player's $5 million. I think Abear at one point had gone down to that level, and I was like, I would never have considered Abear because I thought he was $10 million. Well, he hadn't been producing for a while, so then all of a sudden he starts producing, or I think he's going to produce, and he's only $5 million. I'm like, I didn't even get a chance to consider him because I thought he was so expensive. But go out and find those players that they're still out there because of the new pricing format. There are players that haven't produced a little bit, but that you can expect to produce relatively soon. And so I think that that's one of the takeaways that I got from this week. I mean, Manotas was a bad example, but Castianos was a perfect example of this. You got a $4 million forward, and he is basically one of the top scorers of the week. And it was actually something that a lot of people had because they knew that he was going to play a larger role in the offense with Iber. And was it Matrica was out as well?
Yeah, well, Matrica has been sold to Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
or technically loaned, but whatever.
Yeah, he was going to be taking on a bigger role, and he was inexpensive. So you could go out and find those deals, and that's why I agree with Todd. You gotta go for the players that you know can produce, and then go find those values that exist out there. Another plug for the MLS Fantasy Boss Discord chat. That's where I find those players. I mean, yep. I go out and I talk to people, and I find out, hey, there's this player out here. You got people that know their teams, and you can call out and you can find out from those people who's playing that's going to be a good value on those teams, and that's how you can find those players.
Well, all right. Well, those are some good takeaways. That was a big week that we had, and we're going into another week. So as we get into the housekeeping, this is week 1 of the Champions League. So all of the legs are done for the Champions League. So you're either qualified or you're not. So I didn't qualify, so I'm out. So I'm just having fun for the last four weeks of the season. But the guys with me, I think, have definitely qualified, right? Y'all both qualified? Or like second and 20th overall. So
I got it in the first 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, of course. Which I think Reed did too. So I'm interested to hear from him his experience and what y'all think of it after it's all done. But yeah, so we are into the last week, the last stretch of the Champions League. This is the money portion, so it's important to pay attention. And the schedule is changing. I alluded to it at the top of the schedule. The schedule is changing as we started this podcast. So let's try to go into the double game weeks that we have. I started and wrote the script with there are 4 single game week teams, but that has now changed to, I believe, 7 single game week teams. Well, actually, no. There are 6 single game week teams and 1 no game week teams because the Colorado Rapids have had the next 3 games canceled, or I guess technically postponed, due to COVID issues that they've continued to have. So if you're looking on your schedule, I don't know when MLS will update it, but as we're talking right now on YouTube, right now there is Colorado versus Seattle and Colorado versus RSL. Those games are out. So RSL and Seattle are now single game week teams. Colorado will be on a bye, so that's going to be your best option for switcheroos and all of that. As far as single game week teams, scrubs. Lots of scrubs for Colorado. That's kind of been Colorado's role in fantasy this year, is a lot of scrubs, because they can either not have games or have COVID or whatever. Single game week teams, this is the deal with them. So we've got New England, we've got Nashville, we've got Miami, we've got Philadelphia, and what is the one that I missed? I'm trying to do this off the top of my head. Dallas is the other single game week team. The situation for them is this. Philadelphia and New England had a game that was originally scheduled on Sunday, and that game got moved to Monday, I think as a byproduct of the Tennessee Titans and the NFL having COVID issues and needing to reschedule the Patriots game. So yes, MLS games are being rescheduled due to COVID issues in other leagues now. 2020 is great. So that's what. So the New England Philadelphia game, as of right now, is not included in this week's game week. So as of right now, New England and Philadelphia don't have a game week. I'm talking about this right now because that means by the time we do the podcast on Monday tomorrow, we'll have already had a game in the game week of week 2. Because game week 2, the next game week starts next Monday night. This game week starts on Wednesday night at 7:30 Eastern time. 3 games kick off at that point. Everyone else, other than those teams that I've mentioned, is on a double game week. So you've got a lot of options to pick from. But you have to keep in mind, after you get it done Sunday, once it opens up Monday morning, change your lineups as soon as you can if you want New England and Philadelphia's players for their double game week. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. I also mentioned Nashville and Dallas are on a single game week this week. Their game is on Tuesday of next week. So those teams will still have double game week rotation type issues. It's not like they just have the weekend off, because no one has off in this crazy schedule. But that's something to keep aware of if you're looking about rotations and thinking about the kind of lineups that they're going to put out. So I've had to redo my entire housekeeping section on the fly because MLS is just changing stuff. And it'll probably change up again. We talked about the teams that had issues at the top of the podcast, but I'll mention them again. Columbus Crew in Minnesota, those are the teams that had positive testing as of last weekend. The last thing that I saw from Columbus was that they had no positive tests today and that they were looking to return to training. So their game against FC Cincinnati looks like it's still on. I have not seen anything about Minnesota. Ryan, have you seen anything about Minnesota and whether they're looking positive or negative for Wednesday?
I think there was a Minnesota coach that tested positive, I think.
Okay.
But they had 2 players in their starting lineup who tested positive earlier.
Yeah, I don't remember who they were after they even announced them at all.
Right.
But,
I haven't seen
the names of it. So it was 2 starters. But I think they will be one of the more risky teams to pick.
Yeah, so Columbus plays FC Cincinnati, and Minnesota plays Chicago in the first game of the week. Obviously, this is something to keep. It's very fluid. Keep in touch. Keep on social media to try to see what happens. We kind of get a heads up, maybe Tuesday, early Wednesday, about this. MLS has been kind of good about canceling them with enough notice. So, fingers crossed that happens again this time. But it's not foolproof. Sometimes you think games are going to be canceled. Because I think it was this week where we had New York City and DC that got pushed back like an hour or 2 hours because DC had a positive test, but they decided to go ahead with that one anyway. I don't know why. Some go and some don't. MLS's protocols are a mystery to me, and I mean that's like everything else that MLS writes down. It's a mystery to me anyway. So that's kind of the situation that we're going into with this week. But so there's a lot of double game weeks still out there. And so we're going to kind of make the picks as of what we've got right now. So starting with goalkeepers and defenders, Todd, who are you looking at this week?
So right now I have McCarthy from Miami as my starting keeper, and Marcinowski from San Jose. It's in case of emergency, fill in as for a switcheroo. Would not like to play the San Jose goalie, but just he's 4.0, so that's a cheap option. Yeah, the double game week changes did knock out a couple of my options because I thought that probably Seattle would be a good option, but now he only has one game this week. And I also thought Houston had a decent option as a cheap goalkeeper, but their second game with Minnesota is going to be in a little bit of doubt. So that is one that you are going to want to look at, because I think for keepers and defenders, the 2 games is the most important, because the clean sheet has so much part of their value, and 2 games really increases your chance of getting a clean sheet. For your attackers, I think you can have one really strong game and still score, but for your keeper, you really want to try to find one who has 2 games that don't seem to have any issues.
What about some of your defenders?
So defenders, so there are a lot of teams I like their matchups this week. So Miami, I actually doubled up on defense. Part of that is because right now I have LGP from Miami is only 4.0, so right now I'm playing him to save money. Picking Omar Gonzalez from Toronto. I ideally have more money for Larea from Toronto. He's, I think, 10.1. I'll try to work around my budget and see if I can fit him in. But Toronto has pretty strong matchups. And for some cheap ones, Houston's first game is home against Nashville, which I had a lot of trouble scoring. So I have Lundqvist on my bench, who's 4.3. And right now I'm looking at Kyle Smith from Orlando at 4.6 on my bench. But that one's pretty flexible. If Minnesota actually plays, I would like to get their double home games in, but that's a pretty big risk.
Ryan, what about you?
Before we do that, Mike, could you let my computer into the Zoom meeting so I don't have to use my phone?
I sure can. See if we can get you a little technical difficulty. Well, not difficulties. Hopefully not difficulties. As we swap over to computer Ryan. While we're waiting for Ryan, I'll kind of go through some of my picks. I have 2 players from Portland this week. Part of that is who they're playing. They're playing RSL and LAFC, both of whom have significant absences for international duty. So I have Steve Clark. He's 6.8, a lot cheaper than some of the other premium keepers. And I have Toloma in defense, 5.2. Again, just because RSL has really had trouble scoring. They were only able to put 1 against Vancouver, and Rusnak is out. I also like Toronto's matchup. I have Aro from TFC right now. Kind of flexible on which TFC defender that is. Kind of put in the most expensive, one of the more expensive ones, his placeholder. I have LGP 4.0 for Miami on the bench. I mean 4.0. He has pretty good upside if he can get involved in the attack. The other defenders I have right now, I have Jack Elliott. He has a single game week option, but his single game week is against DC United, who did just fire a coach. We probably should have mentioned that. In the housekeeping, Ben Olsen is finally gone, but I don't know that it's going to generate a whole lot of offense for DC. Still like Philly in that matchup. And then I have Mensa from Columbus Crew. Obviously, a big question there is whether or not they do play FC Cincinnati or go forward. But if they do go forward, they play Cincinnati, and then they play New York City, who's lost Matrica, may or may not get Maxi Morales back, and won't have A-Bear. But New York City is a team that's kind of struggled offensively, missing a lot of their key pieces, and Columbus has been pretty stout defensively. So, and even if the New York City game is not that great, the Cincinnati matchup is really good. But if that gets canceled, obviously I'll have to adjust on the fly. So, Ryan, do we have you now fully?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Cool. So my first. Oh, I suppose I should turn on my video now. Hey!
Hey, we can see.
Alrighty. So this is my first look at teams for this week, but what I've got so far is, let's see here. If I sort my table by which defenses have the best chance at a clean sheet, and I'll eventually publish this week. Looks like Toronto with two games has a 73% chance of getting a clean sheet, so that's pretty darn good. Columbus is up there, and Cincinnati actually has a pretty good chance of getting a clean sheet, which is surprising. Where are they playing? We've got versus Columbus. Okay, well,
DC United.
Double
That's why
home.
they've got.
oh, DC United. That's okay. Yeah. Well, Columbus doesn't have like the most potent offense either. Like it's there. They've got Giassi, but without Zelarayan, I don't know. Like they've got I think like a 30% chance of a clean sheet versus Columbus, so it's not like terrible. So anyways, if you want to, you'll probably be able to find some cheap defenders if you go with Cincinnati.
Oh, yeah.
That's for sure. But at this point, I might tend to go for some defenders who are in some of the earlier games that I know I can get the two people out of. Like don't wait for other later games to happen. If you can find some defenders that have decent clean sheet odds. Again, it's a double game week, so I'm not going to go too much for the high bonus point defenders. I'm going to go for the defenders that have clean sheet odds, and that can go for offensive scoring points. So I'm going to mostly pick wingbacks because, again, you get two shots at it. You may as well go for something that is maybe a little bit less of a chance, like a little more risky. But if you get two shots at something that's a little more risky versus a player that maybe they get 2 bonus points every week, well, 2 bonus points isn't as good as an assist, and it's not as good as a goal, or even like some points from key passes. So if you can find some of those offensive defenders, that's what I'm going to be going for this week. And I don't quite have my list of them yet. Obviously, Brooks Lennon would be one that a lot of people have picked recently, but Atlanta does not have good clean sheet odds versus who are they playing? Inter Miami, who's got a good offense, or at least a halfway decent offense, and then
TFC.
Oh, okay, yeah, there's a reason why. So I may not go for somebody like Brooks Lennon. He's also starting to get to that point where he's a little more expensive. But again, trying to find those inexpensive. I'm not going to pay much for defense this week. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true, especially with how expensive a lot of the midfielders and forwards have gotten.
Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely some cheap options, which we'll probably try to cover a few of them. But I mean, like Ladero's at like 16, which just sucks up your budget so fast.
Let me put it this way: you can get a $5 million defender who starts and has just as good of a chance at a clean sheet as a $10 million forward does at a goal, and they're both worth the same amount of points. So you may as well spend your money in the places where you need to spend money to get that extra goal producing or assist producing value.
Yep. All right. Well, those are some good picks. What about midfielders? Ryan, I'll stick with you. Are you not looking at any midfielders this week?
I think there's some people who are trying to decide between Ladero and Pozuelo as their greater than $15 million potentially captain.
Yep.
I think, let's see, Toronto plays New York and Atlanta versus, let's see, who does Seattle play?
Well, Seattle only plays San Jose now.
Well, at that point, then I wouldn't even take Ladero.
Right.
He's expensive for only being on 1 week, and yeah, he may have a ton of bonus points, which is what I would look for in a single week player. But at this point, why pay that much for a double game week player when you could be paying half that for a single week? Or why would you pay that much for a single week player when you could be paying half as much for a double week? I can't talk. Double game week player. So I'm not going to be taking Lodero then, which I think frees up room for Pozuelo. I'm probably going to take a good serious look at Lee Win again because New England is playing Montreal, and Montreal stinks at defense right now. So I think that that's going to be a good option. And Lee Win again is only like 7 million still, so he's a good shout. And then who else have I got from Morgan from Inter Miami was good. Has been good for the past few weeks. He's actually he's taken on most of the set piece duties, and he even took a penalty after Gonzalo Higuain ended up biffing that one. So I think Morgan might be a good shout out. Again, he's starting to get expensive though. Like this is where we start to talk about those price issues because Morgan was hanging around that $10 million range before. He had a few good games. Now he's $13.5 million. It's starting to get to that point where you can't take too many of those guys. Let's see. Johnny Russell's against Dallas and Chicago. That looks like a good matchup as well. But again, he's 12.4 million. Honestly, somebody like Valeri might be a better choice here. He's only 10.7, but he's still integral to his team's to what his team's doing. So I think I might stick with Lodero and Valeri and win from this past week, but move on from somebody like Johnny Russell and what's Morgan's first name? Luis
Yes.
Morgan. Okay, all right. Yeah. So that I think it's probably I might stick with those other three midfielders and move on from the two more expensive ones that I'm not sure I'll get the value from this week.
Gotcha. Todd, who are you looking at?
So I have all my money put into the midfield this week. So hadn't heard the official Colorado cancellation news. So right now I do have Lodero in my lineup. That's a tough decision because I for that one game that may be like the highest, as good of a point projection as anyone has for one game, even though it's on the road at San Jose. But also he's extremely expensive and it's going to be at the end of the week. So you'd have to save all your money at the end. So I may leave him in right now and then chop him later. I definitely have Pozuelo with neutral site, but pseudo home games for Toronto. Morgan I have for Miami. I have Pedro Santos from Columbus. Like I said, he's getting tons of bonus points. There is a bit of the risk with Columbus, so we'll see if that game's still on. But since their tests were only from staffers so far and they did not have any tests today, I think that he's good to put in for now and just keep an eye on the news. And then my fifth one I have right now is Quintero from Houston, but that one's pretty flexible. Looking at Valeri, if Minnesota plays, they have two home games and good matchups. So Molino and Reynoso are good options if they get good news on the testing front. Yep. And then one more cheaper option. The Galaxy's matchup this week are just amazing. They had double home games against San Jose and Vancouver. So Jet, that's how you pronounce it. I think he's
That's what I know.
He hasn't had a huge lately, but those matches are so good, and he does save a little bit of money. So I think he's a pretty good option to look at.
Well, y'all
That's
covered
a good point.
I do like the Galaxy. I don't have Legit on my team because he's been a little boom or bust, but I have a lot of the name that y'all have. I wish the Galaxy would get rid of Chicharito because I feel like then I would have him absolutely. But I did have Lodero in my team. I actually had him as my captain pick, but I agree with you guys. I have to kind of reconsider that, and I'll probably bring in Pozuelo. I didn't have him in before just as a money issue, but now I'm probably going to make that swap. I also had Pedro Santos. Again, two good games. I had Diego Valeri. His substitutions have kind of kept his price down a little bit, but I mean, every time he's been in there, he's produced, and RSL's having real trouble defensively. And then I have Lee Win coming in off the bench. Again, 7.3. He may be taking set pieces now, or set pieces generally, maybe even PKs. So, and that game against Montreal, I think is a really interesting option. And if he doesn't produce, I can always kind of maybe swap in, especially now that the Colorado situation has created some more flexibility, maybe to bring in one of the Seattle midfielders, or maybe in the San Jose midfielder if I get that desperate. Moving on to looking at chat, a lot of the same names that we talked about. Also see a mention for Montero for Philadelphia. That definitely makes sense with DC United being as bad as they are. I think that's a pretty good single game week option. But I mean, I think we kind of covered some of the bigger names, some of the more popular names.
I'll bring up I think another one that might be good. I think Luis Morgan maybe still has a good shout out. My rankings right now for offense this week go LA Galaxy. LAFC is actually still up there, but again, they're missing a lot of players. So,
and we should mention
kind of
K and the Jar, or K got hurt and came off in the 6th minute.
Yeah.
So between international absences and injuries, LAFC is going to be missing a ton of people.
Yeah, I don't trust LAFC right now. But then comes Minnesota, Toronto, Portland, San Jose, and Espinoza had a really great week last week. I replaced him with Win, and he got the same number of points as Win did. So I was like, okay, well that works out. But I would say Espinoza, I think he's been taking a lot of the set pieces for them as well. Somebody in San Jose, correct me if I'm wrong. Anyways, so that one's one I'd mention. And then RSL is up there too, but I think Rusnak is also gone for international duty, and he's kind of their main producer, so I don't really trust them. And then it goes on down into Miami and Kansas City and Houston after that. But I think Espinoza is a really good addition to our list of potentially top producers this week.
That's a great shout out. Was there anyone else that you were looking at, Todd?
That covers my main one. Another cheap option is Atuesta from LAFC. He's only 7 now. It's good.
Yeah.
That
He'll probably get some more
the first matchup for LAFC against Vancouver is the biggest betting of all the Wednesday matchups. So I know LAFC is missing a lot of players, but if you can find who is going to score in that matchup, they probably are going to put in several goals against Vancouver, who's just not good at all. And they have to play all their games on the road, essentially. So that could be a good matchup.
Yeah, LAFC plays both of their games in Portland this week, even though they're playing Vancouver and Portland.
Is Rossi still? Did Rossi end up going on international duty?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Rossi's
who's taking corner kicks then? Is what I'm wondering. Brian Rodriguez left for international duty, I think.
Yeah.
And then Rossi did. So now who's on corners and set pieces? I know Atuesta has taken a lot of set pieces, but maybe Atuesta takes over some of the corners as well, in which case I would say, he starts to become one of those really good budget options that is going to see a lot of volume for that price point.
Yeah, I didn't watch the game. I would have assumed K would have been taking him before, but now that K is out, I don't know if there's anyone other than Atuesta to take it. That's something we're probably going to have to pose to the Discord chat to see if
that's true.
who took the set pieces now? Who's fifth down the row? But speaking to LAFC, the loss of their forwards with Rossi and Rodriguez out meant that a 4.0 forward ended up playing. Muzovsky, and he was actually one of the Dream Team players of the week. He ended up getting it.
He was the MLS player of the week.
Yeah, I mean what he got? Did he get 2 goals? Well, he got 15 fantasy points, 2 goals, and an assist. And he's been coming on mostly as a substitute, but it's just not his first goal of the season. But so you actually now have 2. We talked about LAFC having good matchups in the previous segment, but now you have 2 kind of budget forwards Bradley Wright Phillips, who is now a 10.6 million forward. The price has finally caught up to the fact that he's one of their best players. But I mean, he's still a lot cheaper than some of your other forwards.
Yeah.
And then Murkowski is 4.6 or 4.1. Anyway, he's
Like
dirt
4.1.
cheap. 4.1, yeah.
Yeah, so next week, watch it. Next week, he's probably going to go up in value substantially because this pricing system takes in, I think, at least 3 weeks into account. And so his previous values of like 1 or 2 points or whatever are still being counted. So if he plays a full game this next week, if he plays 2 full games this next week, or at least a decent amount of both games, he's going to rise in value the week after that. So this is your chance to get in on him before he starts rising in value again.
Yeah, so with that in mind, I actually have him on my bench as kind of like a really good boom or bust player option because it frees up some money elsewhere. And then up top, I have Pavone. We talked about those two. Both of the LA teams have really good matchups. The Galaxy have San Jose and Vancouver. LAFC have Vancouver and Portland. The theme of this podcast is basically pick against Vancouver. If you haven't picked up on that yet. And then I have Jossie Zardes. I guess the spirit of Blaine has taken over me. I just feel like someone has to pick Zardes in this podcast, so I wanted to make sure I did it. But I mean, Cincinnati, this is such a good option that I couldn't pass it up. But what are some of the forwards that y'all are looking at, Ryan?
I got Moose as a sub coming in. Right now, I've got Taddy Castianos as another. Again, he's only 4 million. Last week, he had 13 points. You're not going to see that again, probably, but he's still a good shout out, I think, because he has substantially more volume now in the new NYC offense with some of the other players gone. And to your point about Vancouver, I just readjusted my expected goal differential rankings, and Vancouver is in a tier of their own at the bottom. Like, they are so far behind. DC is also in a tier of their own, but one level above Vancouver. And then Montreal is in another tier of their own above that. Basically, you've got this entire field of the rest of the teams, and then you have Montreal, DC, and Vancouver as the 3 worst teams, all getting progressively and substantially worse than each other. Anyways, I wanted to throw that in there as something. I was like, I should go see how bad Vancouver actually is. And it's pretty bad. Anyways, so I've also got, in light of that knowledge, I also have Pavone up top. Because I think he played this last week, and I don't think he's been called up for any international whatevers.
He's
and
stuck here.
yeah, main playmaker on our team that's facing Vancouver. And San Jose has generally pretty good underlying stats, but they have not been playing up to them. Let's just put it that way. So based off of what other teams have gotten on them from like a shots perspective, they shouldn't have let that many goals in, but somehow they have. So, okay. I'll go with that narrative. And so Pavone is my third one. I think he should be a lock-in this week for everybody. I don't see why anybody shouldn't have him. He's 10.5, which is honestly not bad for a forward that's of his quality and of his bonus point ability. So you got to go with Pavone if you can.
Todd, who are you looking at?
So I've joined the Pavone group. I have him in. I have Wuzowski from LAFC, and I'm basically doing a switch right now. I have him in the starting lineup. I would take him out. I'm first going to see Akinola from Toronto with Josie hurt. So I think that's a pretty good option. He has the 2 home/neutral site games and starting up top for them. And one other one I've been looking at right now, most of my lineups have had 3 Miami and 3 Toronto players based on their matchups and prices. So Gonzalo Higuain, he's pretty cheap for a forward. The talent is obviously there. He hasn't had a huge game yet, but I can see it coming anytime now just with how strong he is. So that's definitely an option that people should keep an eye on, even if the form isn't the best right now.
Yeah, he's got that Montreal matchup that looks juicy, especially.
Yeah. I saw in chat they mentioned Akinola. I don't know why people are picking Akinola over the only TFC scorer who scored this weekend, which was Patrick Mullins. You thought I was getting a podcast without mentioning that? You're wrong. Shannon Friedman mentions Ibobasi. I think that's a pretty good pick too as a boom or bust. There's definitely like a weird crop of like cheap forwards who can like, really score, more so than I can ever remember in years past. We've not 3 of them that we mentioned so far. But yeah, I think those are all some really good picks. And it's definitely something to keep in mind, I think probably going into this weekend, is to have some backup plans in case we get some curveballs last minute with COVID testing. Just kind of keep in mind, if that game gets canceled, I'm going to do this to this player. And I kind of think of a kind of a list of moves that you might make if the unexpected happens. So with all of that in mind, who are y'all looking at for captains, Todd?
So it was between Pozuelo and Lodero before the Colorado news broke. So I'm looking at Pozuelo right now, but I think Pavone is a strong option and probably won't be quite as common. But with those matchups, he could really go off. So if you're looking to be a little different, I think Pozuelo will probably be the most common captain, but Pavone could be a pretty good second option.
Yeah, Pozuelo is up there in the expected goals and expected assists per game, and he also gets bonus points. So it's really hard to not take him. You've got all these other. I mean, maybe Pavone would be up there for me as well, but I'm definitely going double game week player. Higuain, like you mentioned, actually does have really good underlying numbers. I'm surprised I didn't see him before. But he's got a lot. It looks mostly he's getting it from expected goals. Yeah, he doesn't help much out in the assist division, but he does look like he's pretty far up there in expected goals. So I think that probably I'll end up with Pozuelo given the armband, but I think Pavone's a good shout out as well for people who are interested in somebody else that's got a good solid floor, but can go for all those goals and assists too.
Yeah, I think I'm with you guys. I think I'll probably have Pozuelo as either my 1 or 2. I think Pavone is interesting. I'll throw out a few names I kind of thought about as I was making my picks. I could definitely see going with Santos for Columbus with the points he's produced. And if that Cincinnati game goes forward, I think that's a pretty good opportunity. The same is true with Diego Valeri. If he's starting and he's getting minutes, he's pretty much putting 6 or 8 up there. The only real question is whether he starts that first game. If he does, I wouldn't have a problem putting the armband on him. Kind of the good thing with most of the players we've talked about is that they're all the West Coast teams except for Pozuelo. But if you are kind of thinking between Pavone, Valeri, and some of those, they're all on the West Coast. So you'll have that kind of you'll be able to see most of those lineups before you make the pick. Well, all right. Well, I think that does it for this week. We're just kind of come to our plugs. Todd, where can people find you?
Mainly I'm popping up on the MLS Discord under Todd Wad there. So, and my team is Boycottamo. So if you're in the Champions League, just look for that, and we'll see how that sorts out on the 250 so teams duking it out in these last 4 weeks. But I don't really put anything on my Twitter, but there's lots of good people to follow, and so mainly look for me in the chat. Pop up every once in a while.
Sure. And then I'm at MLS Fantasy Stats, and I post on Twitter pretty much every week, oftentimes with my weekly matchups for expected points for clean sheets and things like that for defenders. Right now, that's kind of what I can do with the with the change in the double game week format, my offensive point prediction ability has needed to change. So I haven't changed it yet. But at least you'll get defensive predictions from me at the moment. And I'm also on the Discord channel, and I'm Ryanalytic because I work in analytics. Ryan, so it's kind of fun. So that's where you can find me. And I just heard a couple little tweets, so that might have worked. Wow, look at that! Plugs work, people. And what else do I got? One other thing that I might plug is that I'm a part of American Soccer Analysis, and they have an expected goals table, I guess you can call it, interactive table that you can do, that's where I go to find out, basically, especially on these double game weeks where you get 2 shots at something, either a clean sheet, which is what I do my defensive stats for, and then pretty much I go for my offensive stats, I go to American Soccer Analysis, and then I just sort by, I go down to the per 96 minutes, which is the length of a game typically. And that's how I typically find those players that are going to get good offensive points and be maybe high risk, but generally speaking, high reward, especially as long as you got that, 2 bites to the apple kind of thing. So American Soccer Analysis, go to their app. They've got their app. It's not a phone app. It's an app on their website. But yeah, they're good guys, and they've got some good stats out there for you guys too.
I'm going to throw you to curveball because I got a reminder in chat of something I forgot, which is the boom and bust segment that we've been trying to do. Which players do you think are really good boom and bust? I kind of mentioned, I think Musovski is probably a pretty good option. I could also see kind of any of the Seattle players kind of falling into this category because that San Jose game is a really good opportunity, but you're only going to get one bite of the apple.
Yeah.
I kind of see LGP and Lee Win as players who fall into that category. What are some other players that fall into that kind of boom or bust for y'all?
I would say any single week team is going to be considered boom or bust, and not in a good way. Potentially more likely to bust than boom. But I would say Akinola is going to be one of those guys. I don't think he's really gotten any bonus points. Any of these strikers up top, Zardes again, Johnny Russell, Jordan Morris as well, I think, is, if you're looking for, again, Seattle, and then Bradley Wright Phillips would be another guy that I'd say is you're not going to get a floor with these guys, but they could potentially have some pretty good matchups this week, and their underlying numbers are phenomenal.
Todd, anyone to add?
I think the Jet that I mentioned earlier, his matchups are great, but his bonus points are next to nothing, so you're really hoping for goals or assists for him. And then for the LFC options, like Musovski, Atuesta, anyone that you have on there, that first matchup against Vancouver is so good, but they do have tons of players missing, and they are playing both on the road. So it's definitely a big boom or bust option. But if you're trying to go big, like if you're in the Champions League or trying to make up ground in the standings, that's a potential option where I could see a lot of goals. It's just we haven't seen consistent production yet.
All right. Well, thank you to chat for pointing out that I almost missed that segment. Reed would have been very upset with me if I'd forgotten to do boom or bust. So I'm glad we got that fit in. I want to thank Todd and Ryan for joining us under the circumstances and filling in. It's obviously a big double game week. We want to make sure that we got our podcast out to get some great tips for y'all. It's so important to do well in the Champions League. And then I just want to end with our thoughts and prayers to Reed and Blaine, for Reed enjoying life with his new baby, and then for Blaine for the loss in his family. So our thoughts and prayers go out to them, and to all of y'all, good luck. And now I have to figure out how to actually end the stream, which I do not know how to do without shutting the meeting. Let me see if I can just end it.
Just do it.
This may actually. I don't know if I should actually end it. Chat. I think we're to stay on YouTube because I don't want to actually prevent this from recording by hitting end. So I'm going to message Reed and let us. Reed, come help me. Reed.
Oh, I should have made that noise if Blaine was on the channel or on the Big Jeopardy fan there.
Yeah, this is the MLSFI after party, Patrick. So this is where you can just like say stupid things. You can. Yeah, if Blaine was on here, I would have probably gotten some zoo trash talk, which would have hurt myself. Oh. All right, I message Reed, so we'll see what he does. So in chat, did most of y'all make Champions League, or how did y'all end up doing?
I should get on chat and find out what people are saying.
We've got Patrick and Shannon and Ari. By the way, thank you, Ari, specifically for letting me know that Colorado's game was canceled. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
come on.
On this recording, I did not catch that news before we started.
No, I looked at the timestamp. It was literally as we hit the record button at 8:30 Central Time, which is when we started. So I'm interested to see what